Professors and university employees of Reddit, what behind-the-scenes campus drama went on that students never knew about? In our chemistry department a few years back, a grad student who was failing started poisoning another graduate student they worked with closely by putting carcinogens in their foods and drinks. Colorless, odorless, flavorless, thanks to his chemistry knowledge. He was eventually caught, and I'm not sure what happened to him. Thrown out for sure, perhaps arrested. Another year, a grad student pushed another student down a flight of steps to try to kill them. Chemists are crazy. 2 professors arrested for meth production, one for murdering his wife with lab supplies, another stepped down quietly for embezzlement. And that's how we replaced half our chemistry department in a year. In the English department, one of the professors got arrested for domestic violence, divorced his wife, then got another English professor pregnant and eventually married her. And they all saw each other at department meetings. Super awkward. Edit to clarify, the husband and original wife were both professors. He had an affair with another English professor. Wife found out, and there was a major fight. Cops were called. He was arrested for DV, but I believe the charges were dropped. He filed for divorce, moved in with the other professor, got her pregnant, and he and the ex were still fighting over child support and alimony when I left. I was the pregnant professor's TA, but I was definitely team original wife. I was a professorial assistant to the Italian department, and one of my favorite professors did a showing of a very famous Italian film, Swept Away, on a weekend. This was an outside-of-class activity, which no one was required to attend. At a college with college-age students. We don't have time to watch this in class, so we'll watch it over the weekend in the auditorium. The movie in question would be considered controversial by American standards, but Italian film standards, it is also controversial, but considered a pretty important film for anyone studying film. It deals with some pretty intense issues involving dynamics between men and women, wealthy and poor, as well as, depending on your interpretation, our pay scene. I was working in the department when we did this movie showing, and so I got a front row view of it blowing up. Apparently some freshmen, who were 18 years old, attended the screening and complained to their parents, who complained to the school. The school decided the best option was to fire my prof. The Italian department went to bat for him, reminding the school that adult students attended the screening voluntarily. The school knew they couldn't get away with firing him specifically for that. So at the end of the quarter, they revoked his contract renewal. He was supposed to come back the next year for lifestyle choices that conflict with university standards. Dumb move. I don't know who on the university's legal team wrote it that way, but they should be fired. The professor in question was Pakistani and openly gay, living with his husband. As far as I understand it, he took their asses to court for discriminatory dismissal. They settled out of court for an unknown sum, but it was enough that my professor and his husband moved out to Italy, where he now works at a university there and is very happy. No one outside of the Italian department knew what happened. Professor was there one quarter and gone the next with no warning whatsoever. When I was going through my PAAHDAADDDDHEHE program, a buddy of mine had his professor die on him. Young guy in his 40s got hit by a car. Boom. Not so fun fact. When a professor dies, their grants go away. If a grad student is on the verge of finishing just writing up their results, they can sometimes hop to another lab and get by. My friend, however, was only in his 2nd year. He had to start over with a new project in a new lab. Essentially lost 2 years of his life on a project that yielded absolutely nothing. Woo! Grad school. So uplifting. One of our male English professors was being stalked by a female student, to the point he had to get a restraining order against her. The only reason my class knew was because she saw him in the hallway, entered our classroom, and made a huge scene the first day of class, and security had to be called to make her leave. After that, the door was always locked for that class, and whoever was in the back row were scouters to let in late students. He also had to cancel class to go to court for the situation at least once. My PI professor for grad school had his lab raided by the FBI. This happened long before I joined. Apparently, One of his first or second class of grad students in the 80s 90s decided that they wanted to use lab resources to brew some meth. Very easy to do with the equipment we have. From what I am told, this student would stay late in lab after others had left to get this done. In Breaking Bad style, he fences his drugs to some distributor and thought that was the end of it. The purity of his drugs was enough that they were able to trace it back from the streets to him and the lab. A sting operation shut down the lab while the dust settled, and my professor was cleared of all wrongdoing, since none of this was under his direct control, and all campus resources were being misused by the student. State Intelligence Bureau told the professor that it was the largest and purest operation they had seen in the state at this time. Prominent professor was sleeping with his students. Actually, he met his wife that way, and then had a huge issue with dating other students after getting married. Lawsuits were threatened. He resigned and moved 3,000. This was exaggerated by about 2,000 miles away very quickly. No news. No public info release. IT was all just known through the grapevine of staff. One of the biology professors allegedly did this too while he was married. Eventually got one of the grad students pregnant and ended up leaving his wife and kids to marry the grad student. That somehow absolved him of any misconduct because they were in a legal relationship instead of being in a teacher-student type dynamic. Other than feeling bad for the prof's old family, I felt particularly bad for the grad student's fiancé, who had given up everything and moved halfway across the country to be with her in the first place. He ended up understandably getting depressed and ended up taking a leave of absence from his own studies before supposedly moving home. I worked at a large university, and right before I started, the longtime dean of the school went on sabbatical. I didn't think anything of it until 2 months later when I found out that the university forced him to take time off because he blew almost all of the school's budget on fancy dinners with donors. We're talking like $1,000 plus on alcohol-heavy meals. Showed up to official university events high off cocaine, and kept a second admin assistant as essentially his sex slave. He had a private bathroom with a shower installed in his office. He sent the school into a major budget crisis and was a PR disaster waiting to happen. It was a huge mess. The acting dean who stepped in got a lot of shit for how much damage control she had to do. Ultimately, he returned a few years later, just as a part-time faculty member, but still, totally wild. When I was 22-25 now, I worked at a community college chemistry lab. We handled all the chemicals and equipment that were used for the labs. Just general chemistry IN2 and organic chemistry IN2, so nothing too dangerous. We did, however, have a small cabinet full of chemical reagents that were technically too dangerous for me to handle. When those needed to be used, it had to be my boss that handled. I think I technically wasn't even allowed to be in the room. Those were the rules. But the reality was that my boss was a mess. She was often, and I mean, like, most of the time too busy dealing with issues from her personal life to do her job. There were countless times when she just wasn't around, and I had to make important decisions by the seat of my pants. She constantly had me doing things that I wasn't supposed to be doing, like boiling down solutions of sulfuric acid to increase the concentration. Part of the reason she was such a mess was that she was already in trouble at work, because she was caught having student employees do things they shouldn't have been doing. Anyway, one day after classes were done, we needed to set up an experiment that required us to handle pure lab grade. Nothing is ever truly pure diatomic bromine. Not only was I not supposed to handle that reagent, but it was probably the most dangerous thing we had. At least according to my boss. She was busy on the phone with her ex-husband or something, and insisted that it was no big deal and that I should just do it myself. She's my boss, so I don't argue. Well, I end up dropping a 1-2 liter bottle of bromine. It shatters, dark brown liquid spreads across the floor, and red bromine vapor immediately starts to fill the room. I get out of there as fast as possible, but I'm already seeing stars and feel as though I might faint by the time I get to her office, which is just down the hall. I truly cannot describe the feeling of having bromine vapor in your lungs, but it's f***ing bad. Without me even saying anything, she knows what's happened. The smell is unmistakable. My clothes were stained, and she probably heard the bottle shatter. She rushes to the lab. I realize that I need to wash this stuff off of me immediately, so I run to the shower we have in the spare lab room that we use for storage. I rinsed for probably 20 minutes. Stark King naked, mind you, letting the water wash over my open eyes the entire time. I'm gonna cut it off there, but long story short, she got put on immediate suspension and never returned to work. No students ever found out what had happened. I often hung out with other students while I was working when the faculty weren't around. Any one of them could have easily been in the wrong place at the wrong time and suffocated in that room before help arrived.